Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I apologize for that dry throat. No idea why. Probably the train trip yesterday. So I am visiting family and friends as I have promised, but there was a lot of news actually accumulated over the last 24 to 36 hours. So I thought, why not come in, give you a quick breakdown, react to all of it myself. I mean, the iPhone 16e itself is still so fresh on our minds. There are constantly new information coming out. My cat is running around like crazy, not understanding why I'm talking to myself. But let's hope it all goes well and she doesn't push my MacBook off the table like she tried doing last time. So obviously we reacted live to the iPhone 16e announcement. Plenty of YouTubers have done like pricing analysis, what you should or shouldn't buy. So all the kinds of stuff that we usually don't do quite in the same way. We try to react to stuff together. I look at your chat. You guys let me know what are your questions, what your agreements, your disagreements. By the way, I apologize if I sweat. I turned off all the heaters and it's still incredibly warm today somehow at the end of February. So bear with me unfortunately on that one. So but before we start, shout out for you to do all the YouTube jazz as we call it around here. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and of course consider becoming a channel member, a supporter over on Patreon, or leaving a super chat or a super sticker as a direct donation. I understand I'm not streaming at a very opportune time. But this is the time I have. This is going to be a short stream and we're just going to see how it goes, who can join, who can ask questions. Before we get into any articles, there is actually a fascinating video that I just found out exists. Like literally like 9 to 5 Mac made a report about it like a few minutes ago. And apparently Apple partnered with this YouTuber to give him an exclusive inside look in how they test their new modems and stuff like that. So obviously the C1 is powering the iPhone 16e. It's Apple's first in-house 5G modem. It's the result of them acquiring Intel and then several years of work. We still don't know if they will have to pay any royalties to Qualcomm. Like for all we understand, Apple hopes that they don't have to, that they made this device basically free of patents that would infringe on anything that Qualcomm owns, but you never know, right? These companies love finding one hair in the soup and then creating a whole big issue about it. I mean, that's their right. They create technology, they create patents. So yeah, it will be interesting if Apple will be able to save money. That might also be part, by the way, of why the iPhone 16e might be not as cheap as some people expected. Apple might not yet know if the C1 and later C2 modems, maybe they'll be like C Pro variants, right? Like their A Pros and like their M Pros and Max and Ultras. So maybe Apple doesn't know if down the road they will have to, I said have to 30 times for some reason, if they'll have to pay patents royalties to Qualcomm. So, and again, we've mentioned the tariffs, all that stuff. My last video actually got demonetized for being a little bit too, well, I disputed that and it got accepted, but the video was like, I believe, shadow banned, and like from the algorithm, we just lost all views once the video got live. That's a completely different issue. So as always, please like the video and comment, because those things really help the algorithm and they help us attract new people. And they help a video, even a live video, to find a new audience beyond that. We have Angelica joining chat saying, again, something new, I guess. Yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about old stuff. With new facts and new opinions. Well, I'll try to have some interesting opinions for you guys. Let me, of course, know what you think, because the C1 is Apple's new wave of in-house silicon. And I mean, sure, we don't yet have any like performance benchmarks, no clear efficiency data. But if Apple's promises about like the battery gains that we see for the iPhone 16 are true, then there's a pretty good reason probably to be excited about the future of Apple's own modems. More specifically though, less so even about the silicon inside the modems or in the transceivers, but actually because of their integration with Apple's by far strongest part of their ecosystem, which is Apple Silicon itself. So their integration with A-series and down the road M-series processors will be really, really crucial to make Apple C modems, and God knows how what they will call their Wi-Fi modems, because technically W1 is already taken. W1 was the name of their chip inside their first AirPods. Now they switch to H-series chips, and I wonder if they will just reuse the W branding and just pretend like that W1 chip on the original AirPods never happened. Who knows? Maybe they have been planning this chip for such a long time that's why they eventually rebranded from W1 to H1. Yeah, but let's actually start with that behind the scenes tours of how Apple builds the C1 modem, what Apple's engineers and executives had to say, and then we'll continue with other Apple news, rumors, and reports as we usually do. Let me adjust the playback speed to just be 1.1. We don't need to rush through things. Let's have a look.
There's one quiet workhorse that rarely gets the spotlight: the modem. It's the component that keeps you connected whether you're in the heart of the city or on a quiet country road. But what happens when Apple decides to take control of this critical piece of technology? I was able to get an exclusive tour of Apple's modem testing labs for a behind-the-scenes look at the creation of the C1, Apple's first in-house modem chip that could subtly reshape the mobile experience for Apple users going forward.
I mean, like, can it improve battery life and stuff like that? Yeah. Do I think that Apple will be the company that will be as innovative with modems as they have been with Apple Silicon? Quite honestly, I don't think they really need to, because all the innovation is already inside Apple Silicon, right? They have their best-in-class efficiency cores to oversee some of the tasks of the C1. They have, of course, their storage controllers and stuff like that. They have their on-screen awareness, which I joked online that Apple is bringing on-screen awareness to their C1 modem before they are bringing it to Siri and Apple Intelligence. So, like, they have a lot of control over the pipeline, which is kind of the main innovation here. I guess they have already been doing a little bit of customization. Like, I recently found out that the modems that they use from Broadcom are not entirely off the shelf. They have some Apple magic sprinkled on. Whether or not that's a significant amount of magic or whatever magic Samsung is doing with the Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy, that I couldn't tell you. I'm just not an engineer in that regard. Relay964 joining the chat. Hi. So let's see how Apple tests the C1 and what its advantages, at least according to them, will be.
Now, before we jump into the details of the C1, what even is a smartphone modem? Well, the modem is the component inside your phone that connects you to mobile data networks. Think of it as the bridge.
So modem, of course, you can also have modems for Wi-Fi and for Bluetooth, and I guess the chips overseeing even like your ultra wideband connection, like Apple's U1 and U2 chips, you can kind of call all of them modems. But yes, in the most traditional sense, we usually refer to at least like a cellular modem as a modem. Yeah. Nothing bad here, obviously. I mean, it should be noted that this is not the only component that allows you to have a connection to cellular networks. You'll still need a transceiver. That's basically the part that translates the wireless frequencies to data that your phone can read, and you need an antenna system, whether it's a significant one that goes throughout the entire body, and then that's why we have all those little plastic cutouts inside the titanium frame on the iPhones. Or if it's just like brute force because the entire body is plastic, so maybe you don't need quite as strong as antenna because your body is quite radio frequency transparent. That of course then depends on the entire product. But yeah, the pipeline from like antenna to transceiver to modem, the modem is here kind of the part that Apple can most customize. The components that go into transceivers and especially antennas, they're not that easy to miniaturize at this point. We're like 40, 50 years into that tech. That technology, while it's no longer analog, obviously, and analog tech is really hard to scale down, it is based on transistors and stuff, but it's hard to like use the latest node. Apple cannot just say, oh, we're gonna switch to a 3nm transceiver and we'll have like the best basically antenna to modem pipeline we can have. That's not really how it works. Usually it takes like 4 or 5 years sometimes to adopt a node that is already used in stuff like regular processors and even memory, right? Memory storage, they also rely often on older nodes, but usually still newer nodes than something like a transceiver. And the modem is somewhere in between. Modems still usually use slightly older nodes than main processors, but a generation older, maybe even 2.
Between your phone and the world. It translates signals from cell towers into data that lets you browse the web, stream videos, and make voice calls. The modem determines how fast and reliably your phone can access the internet. It handles everything from older 2G and 3G signals to the faster 4G LTE and 5G networks of today. Without a good modem, your phone might struggle with slow downloads, dropped calls, or unreliable connections, especially when you're on the move. In essence,
all correct.
The modem is crucial because it directly affects the overall performance of your device. A better modem means faster data speeds, more efficient power use, and smoother performance even when the network is crowded. This is why Apple's decision to design...
Well, a completely crowded network that like has its own bandwidth limited, you might not like beat that with a good modem, because if the problem is on the side of the carrier provider, that's not really something that you can do. But of course, there are plenty of ways in which you can have a better antenna built in, you can have a faster modem, you can have a more efficient modem, or you can do even what Qualcomm does, and you can integrate the modem directly onto the SoC and create more efficiency through that. And that way you can actually have a modem that is built on the latest nodes, right? As I said, modems usually lag behind a gen or two, but if you put it onto your main SoC, unless you're using like chiplets, that's already an advantage that Apple didn't have. Apple had to buy like Samsung 4nm node produced modems from Qualcomm. Meanwhile, of course, Samsung's 4nm is worse than TSMC's even early 5nm. And TSMC also, of course, has the advantage for Apple. If they produce something there, that's where their mass production advantage comes from. Now that Apple is rumored to be building their own cellular modems and their own Wi-Fi modems, God knows they will be able to get even larger orders from TSMC and reduce their costs even further. 2nm modems when, is asking Relay. I don't think for the next 3 years at the very least.
And its own modem chip is such a big deal. It's about taking control of one of the most critical components of modern smartphones in a way that they did with the system on a chip on the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. So in a huge but
I actually have never heard of this YouTuber. He sounds pretty great.
And as part of that announcement was the introduction of the Apple C1 modem subsystem. For the first time ever, Apple is developing its own modem chip rather than relying on a vendor like Qualcomm, a supplier that has powered not only Apple's devices in the past, but also countless Android and Windows devices.
And they're still supplying it, and they're very likely to still be the main supplier of this year's iPhone Pro models, and probably even the regular iPhone 17. It might just be that the iPhone 17 Air and the 16e, because efficiency is the main focus on those products, will be benefactors of getting the C1.
Now, with the C1 at its core, the iPhone 16e is positioned as the most affordable member of the iPhone 16 family. And I say this seems like a subtle announcement because it feels like most of the attention is on the iPhone 16e itself, with many not realizing exactly what's happening before our eyes with...
Yep, that's because Apple is a consumer tech company. They are not trying to sell you the C1 modem. They're trying to sell you a product that benefits from having the C1 modem.
The C1. Now, I mentioned I got a tour of Apple's labs to learn about the creation of the C1, which
So
was
that's Johnny
incredibly
Cerrucci
eye-opening.
behind
I was led
him?
by a few familiar names like
So-
Apple's Senior Vice President of Hardware Technologies, Johnny Cerrucci, the VP of iPhone Product Marketing, Kyan Drance,
Wow.
and the VP of Wireless Software, Arun Matthias. And here's a few things
Actually haven't-
that I learned.
didn't know
First,
that
these
guy.
labs are where Apple Silicon engineers work tirelessly, surrounded by cutting-edge equipment and advanced simulation tools. Before any physical chip is even manufactured, engineers use sophisticated and
I wonder what people think who believe, all the weird conspiracy stuff about 5G and Wi-Fi. Like, I wonder if those people see those rooms. Like, do they see them as like these people being constantly like under X-rays? Because that would be the logic, right? Is the modem gonna be a yearly update? It actually sounds like it. The way, I mean, there is still room for Apple to at some point say, you know what, this year the last modem was so good, we don't need to change it. And I guess they could even technically rebrand it, like Apple has done with the system on packages on the Apple Watch, right? Sometimes they just took an older chip, optimized it in software for the newest components, maybe connected it to some other thing, maybe like a new display controller, for example. Like, as far as I understand, the S4 series chip and the S5 series chip from the Apple Watch Series 4 and the Apple Watch Series 5 are identical, and then the main change is that there's a new display controller for the always-on display. But the display controller in and of itself is a separate component from the main processor there. So again, it's been quite a while since I did my research. There have been other rebrandings, but I don't see it being like C1 in 2025, expect C2 in 2028 or something like that. I think we'll get very regular updates, maybe annual, maybe on an 18-month cycle or something like that.
and formal verification methods to predict how the chip
Don't forget, like Qualcomm's like X80 modem versus X75 modem versus X70 modem. Those differences, even though sometimes you see like gigantic increases in raw speeds, those do not come from like entirely new architectures. I mean, sure, they switched the manufacturing node if you consider the jump to of the 8 Elite going to TSMC 3 nanometer. But when you think about like the separate modem, like that Samsung designed garbage in a way that Apple gets, almost like fricky sloppy seconds, right? That stuff is not getting that much better. So sometimes they'll just overclock it from one year to another and call it a new chip.
Will behave under various conditions. And these virtual tests are crucial as they help identify potential issues before the modem ever leaves the design stage.
Yeah.
Once the first silicon samples arrive, the real work begins. In these state-of-the-art labs, engineers were subjecting the C1 modem to extreme real-world stress tests. I'm talking environmental chambers where the chip is exposed to temperatures far beyond what it would normally encounter, ensuring that it can operate reliably even in the harshest conditions. They simulate everything
Yeah,
from
but also don't forget, a chip by itself can create ridiculous temperatures. So you want like an artificial way to create those temperatures without just ramping up the frequency to absolute gigachat levels on the modem. You just want to create the temperatures in isolation of the frequency. Then you might want to create the frequency as much in isolation of temperature as possible. So it will cool the processor, the modem maybe a little more than the device itself is capable of cooling it. So you just need to experiment with all of that. You never know when like your electrical resistance might increase because there's some error in design or something like that. Yeah, of course, you'll just go crazy with testing.
Sweltering heat of a summer day to the bitter cold of a winter night. Durability is also key. Engineers run repeated tests like simulating the pressing of the power button tens of thousands of times to verify that every component of the C1 will stand up to daily wear and tear, and that the modem will turn on and off instantly when needed. And then there's a network test themselves. The chip is put through its paces under various simulated conditions, from the heavy data traffic of a packed stadium to the minimal signals of a remote rural area. These tests ensure that the modem not only performs well on paper, but truly
no, we have not yet gotten the battery capacity of the 16E revealed, but from everything that I see, it's probably a little larger than the iPhone 14's battery. It might be as big as the battery inside the iPhone 16. I would be surprised if it's significantly larger than that, but when you think about it, it's a 6.1-inch screen device with actually slightly thicker bezels. Orders just arrive next week. You can already pre-order and they'll arrive next Friday. That's a very typical Apple thing. Like release something on Wednesday or Tuesday or show it off, open up pre-orders that Friday, and then start selling the Friday after.
In the real world. Now, every step of this process is meticulously documented and analyzed.
By the way, what I was going to say about the battery capacity, like it does not have MagSafe. It does not have an ultra-wide camera, right? So there are ways in which there's a path to the iPhone 16e having potentially a larger battery inside than the regular iPhone 16, which given the numbers in terms of battery life that we get from Apple, because some of that testing is also Wi-Fi dependent, so not all of that testing will benefit from the C1. So my question is like, what's going on there? Is it just that the older Broadcom Wi-Fi 6 modem is also way more efficient than whatever Wi-Fi 7 modem is inside the iPhone 16? But otherwise, there's just a chance it might have like a 3600 milliamp hour capacity or something like that. But we do not yet know.
Teams collaborating closely to address any issues that arise. And this rigorous testing and verification is what gives Apple the confidence to say that the C1 modem is not just a prototype or beta, but rather a robust platform built for the future. The C1 modem is manufactured using a state-of-the-art process, using a 4nm process for its baseband.
That's already very interesting. So those are details that I actually read in articles before I knew that this video is here. So 4nm from TSMC, so that puts it in line with Apple's A16 processor. Makes me wonder if it's actually maybe at least partially manufactured in Arizona, where TSMC opened up their 4nm fab. Or at least if maybe Apple got their earliest prototypes from there, because, well, I mean, it's way closer than China.
Term that refers to
than Taiwan, I'm sorry, than Taiwan.
Modem responsible for processing data signals, and a 7nm process for its transceiver, which handles sending and receiving radio signals.
Now, so transceivers, again, that's what I said. That's what before. That's the part that actually translates all the air around you, those radio frequency in the air, to a signal that baseband, that modem can actually read. Now, technically, you actually would kind of have to combine those two to call this a modem, because I mean, what purpose does a baseband chip serve if it doesn't have a transceiver? But this is the part that scales less. So while 7nm might not be as exciting to somebody, but it will actually be very, very hard to ever get like substantially below 3nm or something like that for these components.
Terms, these numbers, the 4nm and 7nm, indicate the size of the transistors on the chip. Smaller transistors mean more can fit on a chip, leading to better performance and power efficiency. And the result is that the iPhone 16e boasts up to 26 hours of video playback on a single charge, ensuring that your device lasts longer even during heavy usage. And in fact, it has the longest battery life of any 6.1-inch iPhone to date. Now, when it comes to compatibility and reliability, Apple didn't design the C1 in a bubble. It was rigorously tested with over 180 carriers across 55 countries. This extensive testing means that
but they also kind of have to do it, right? Because otherwise, imagine like the large lawsuits against Apple if this device was like broadly failing with all the carriers. But this is also, by the way, an advantage that Apple can have, because even getting so many carriers to like test out your stuff in secrecy, that's a big advantage that like no smaller company could manage in that way. I would like this modem in everything if the power savings are good, the carrier speeds are bad where I live anyway, plus still no 5G. I get 5G, but my 5G is like up to 400 megabits per second, right? So, and Qualcomm's modems have been technically capable of those speeds for like, I don't know, 8 years or something crazy like that, right? So to me, the peak speeds don't matter. Now, yes, if your chip, it's similar to like how we see like clock frequency, right? If your chip is capable of hitting 8 gigabits per second, but you only need to hit 400 megabits, so 20 times less, because your carrier doesn't provide more, then that chip can work very efficiently because obviously it doesn't strain itself too much. Now, granted, those 8 gigabits per second are more like millimeter wave speeds, but still, it's still way faster than like the speeds that I can realistically get in most of Germany here. Plus, of course, there's 0 millimeter wave here. So it depends. I mean, Apple could just look at the available speeds and still optimize the efficiency just for those speeds and not even allow the chip to run faster, right? From what we see, this chip does not have that multi-carrier crazy aggregation technology. It does have some, but not the most advanced things that Qualcomm offers. So while I do expect this to have dramatically slower speeds, I actually do agree with you, Relay, that I don't think that those speeds will matter too much to most people. Now, does that mean that I believe that the C1 will be in all Apple products? Actually, no. I believe that it's going to be the C2 and maybe like its subvariant, the C2 Pro or whatever they end up calling it, that actually goes into like the iPhone 18 generation entirely. Maybe we'll finally get like cellular modem Max, right? The next generation iPad Pro. That's how I see it playing out. I mean, technically, we have the rumor that the M5 iPad Pro is launching in the first half of 2026. Well, we are in the first half of 2025 and we just got this C1 modem. Maybe the new iPad Pro, instead of introducing a new M series chip, like last year's iPad Pro introduced the M4, maybe that new iPad Pro will introduce the next Apple C chip, or like a C2.
Whether you're in a bustling metropolis or a remote village, the C1 modem is engineered to deliver reliable connectivity. And then there's what Apple is best at, because one of the most exciting aspects of the C1 modem is how it works hand in hand with Apple's custom A18 processor. This tight integration allows the modem and processor to communicate in real time. So for example, if your phone encounters a congested network, the A18 can signal the C1 to prioritize critical data packets. Maybe you just open messages and you're trying to send a photo or video to someone, or maybe you're playing a game. The A18 can direct the C1 to prioritize what you're actively doing so that things don't feel like they're bogging down. Now, this dynamic traffic management not only improves your connection speed, but also makes your device feel incredibly responsive under heavy network loads.
Apple gets its efficiency from what he is displaying here, the deep integration between the modem and the chip, the main chip, in this case the A18. I wouldn't be surprised. Usually what people don't quite understand, modems aren't usually not just like broad silicon that handles your antenna connectivity, right? There are actual cores on there. Yes, usually these cores are not very advanced, but they're still cores. So if Apple put like a version of their e-cores on it and just optimize them for like working on cellular connectivity, that can put them in a class of their own, right? That's the kind of efficiency that Qualcomm is trying to get by putting their modem directly on the SoC, but Apple instead can say, you know what, we're just going to use 1 or 2 e-cores, slightly redesign them, shuffle some cache around or something like that, And because we have the absolute best e-cores, that's going to be great. And the other advantage is that, as I mentioned, while Qualcomm might use their own SoCs to house the modem, which allows them to use the kind of latest node for it, Apple is getting Samsung built Samsung 4 nanometer node modems from Qualcomm. That's something I only found out in the last couple of days. So, and the efficiency advantage between TSMC 4 nanometer versus Samsung 4 nanometer is like a solid 20 to 30%. If you want to see how bad Samsung's 4 nanometer node is, look at something like the Google Pixel Tensor chips.
This is where you start to see the real benefits of Apple making its own modem start coming into play. Now, beyond your cellular connection and better efficiency, the C1 modem comes with additional capabilities like custom GPS and satellite connectivity. So all those Apple satellite services like emergency SOS, roadside assistance, messages via satellite, and
yeah, that should also be noted. Apple has been doing this stuff even before Qualcomm was doing it itself. Right now, the 8 Elite finally has some satellite connectivity similar to Apple's, but Apple has been on top of that. This is basically an Apple innovation. Like, I know that technically, like, Huawei offered something similar in China, but the way that Apple integrated satellite connectivity, satellite emergency services, from the fact that it's worldwide, that it's free. Originally, it was like free for 2 years, then it was expanded for another year. We don't yet know if Apple will start charging at some point once that time period ends, right? All of that basically goes to, like, Apple has a lot of already built-in innovations, and they build them on top of previously Intel modems and Qualcomm modems. So this time around, they will actually be able to deliver faster on certain visions, well, because it's their own stuff. I mean, sure, that now leads them in the dust if Qualcomm comes out with something, like, let's say Qualcomm is the first to deliver 6G, right? And Apple needs like 2 or 3 years to catch up to that. That could be a disadvantage of using their own modems. But honestly, with how relatively unsuccessful 5G has been, I don't think that Apple is too worried about that.
Will all work on the devices with the C1 like the iPhone 16e. Now, it's important to note that the first generation C1 modem does have one obvious limitation. It doesn't support millimeter wave 5G, which offers ultra high speeds.
And I hope it never does, but they probably will, just because they have some carrier things in the United States. As far as I know, Verizon really likes it. But hey, if Apple goes all in on Qualcomm modems, if Apple goes all in on their own modems, and they decide that millimeter wave is actually worth pursuing, maybe the rest of the world can finally get more of it. But honestly, I think that millimeter wave has been the biggest failure of 5G. And that's saying a lot, given that 5G has not been a big success by any means.
That are mostly relegated to Verizon here in the US,
Yep.
and is a forte of Qualcomm. I think this is probably part of the well-known Apple phased rollout, where we'll see even more powerful and efficient C2 and C3 subsystems that give us even more capabilities, overcoming current limitations sometime in the future. And speaking of the future, for years, Apple has been dependent on Qualcomm for its modem chips. And it's a relationship that not only incurred significant licensing fees and legal fees, but also...
Yeah, but also, like, people forget, technically that only goes back to the iPhone 12. Because before that, yeah, I mean, Apple has used Qualcomm modems. For example, the iPhone 10 used like a 50-50 split almost between Intel and Qualcomm modems. But Apple used mostly Intel modems before that. That's actually why they were kind of known to have worse connectivity than Android counterparts, because almost nobody else used Intel modems.
Meant that Apple had less control over one of its most critical components. With the C1 modem, Apple is poised to change that. By bringing modem technology in-house, Apple stands to reduce costs and gain complete control over its hardware integration, paving the way for a more
I'm liking this guy. Those are very quick, very to the point summaries.
Is the first step in a long-term strategy. By launching this chip in an entry-level model, Apple can collect real-world feedback and refine the technology before rolling it out across more popular and premium devices. Experts predict that while this first generation may have some limitations, future iterations will continue to to obviously improve and eventually maybe offer features like millimeter wave support and even more advanced AI-driven connectivity. Imagine a future where not only
That's actually not quite true. Like, Apple does not need to put AI cores on their modems. I mean, yeah, technically they could, but with its deep integration with the A18, they can easily rely on the neural engine for any of that stuff if it's even necessary. I've thus far seen very little proof that like any kind of AI cores really help that much with like either efficiency or connectivity.
your iPhone, but also your iPad, Mac, and other Apple devices share the same highly optimized connectivity platform. The potential for improved performance, battery life, and seamless integration is enormous. I think
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Great video. Shout out to this channel. Andru Edwards. Didn't know about that guy. Great guy. I mean, he probably doesn't need my shout out. His channel is 4 times larger, but still, great guy. Thank you. Jan Hendrik, grüß Gott to you, sir, as well. My German, my favorite male German viewer, because you're the only male German viewer who comments. Yeah, but that's about it for this video. We do definitely have a lot more about the Apple C modems. In fact, because we are not only talking about the C1 today, but yes, there have been some crazy rumors. This is why I said this video, like if you look at the title, we're talking details about the 16E and the C1. I'm not going to go into one specific detail about the 16E today, and that is some people predict that it has the camera that is equivalent to the iPhone 16 Pro's ultra-wide camera, so a pretty small 1 by 2.55 inch sensor. I cannot confirm or deny that in any way. The biggest thing that kind of suggests that is the fact that the camera bump on the 16E is pretty thin, and that Apple does not claim that the sensor has 100% focus pixels, but instead it has like dual pixel autofocus. So that would kind of more line up with that sensor. However, of course, the industry has a ton of different 48 megapixel sensors that Apple could be using instead of that sensor. So like even if it's a 1 by 1.8 inch sensor, that could allow for the smaller camera bump and for the reduced capabilities. So I'm not going to go into that detail. I mean, I kind of already did, but I'm not going to commit to one version or the other. I know there are some Apple haters already who are saying this camera is going to be horrible. I myself have said if it does have that incredibly smaller main camera size, it could be an absolute deal breaker for me to recommend to anyone to get this phone at MSRP, and I would probably say wait until it's $100 or even $150 cheaper. So that would be a big change in my opinion over the 16E. So, but I'm also not going to commit to that because I simply don't know. That being said, there's been another thing, and I don't even know how this could come up, because to me that makes absolutely no sense. And people have said that supposedly the iPhone 16e might lag MagSafe, not because of the easiest reason ever, which is cost cutting and upselling you on the more expensive iPhone 16 and 16 Pros, but instead that the 16e's C1 modem might be so bad that the MagSafe magnets would interfere with its connectivity. I shit you not, that's what people actually started believing online, to the point that Apple commented on it and that people actually tested it out. So this is shit that I never see. So Apple probably is very protective right now of the C1 to comment on this thing that quickly. To me, this was never even a question. I guess there is like a maybe 1 to 2% chance that this could have been the case, but it's very clearly not. So yesterday, Apple confirmed that the C1 has nothing to do with the omission of MagSafe on the 16E. So this is actually not a rumor piece or anything like that. It's not a report from Bloomberg Smart German. This is Apple officially coming in and correcting a misconception, a bad rumor that has been going around online. That to me is already crazy. So, but what we instead even got were actually tests by case manufacturers, right, who tested wireless charging on the new iPhone, basically said, okay, Apple is meeting their charging promises. Right now, Apple promises 7.5 watts of wireless charging. Obviously, MagSafe used to be 15 watts. Now it's 25 watts, so it's quite a big downgrade. But at least it does reach, with a built-in MagSafe case, 7.5 watts. So unfortunately, it seems like Apple downgraded the entire wireless charging array, in my opinion. They probably are using like thinner charging coils and stuff like that to save cost, to maximize internal space, right? I mean, if you think about it, once you take away the magnets and you make the coils even thinner, then it does leave you with more space for the battery and other stuff. And I'm not saying that to excuse the choice, because Apple could have easily made this device like 0.2 millimeters thicker and still put in all those components and the larger battery. But I'm just saying that people who are saying that the removal of MagSafe has no impact on something like battery capacity, those people are just as misguided as those who are saying, oh, Apple had to remove it. No, it's like there are a lot of like cynical decisions happening at Apple. They're very shrewd. They're very interested in their profit margins. But at the same time, they also don't want to give you a product so bad that you'll just not consider buying it in the first place. Jan, you're saying you might not be the target audience. I actually think that most of you watching aren't, but yeah. But I think it's very interesting and actually nicely executed. Well, there you go. The case manufacturer also conducted tests on whether MagSafe-enabled case and charging puck impacted cellular data speeds. Again, Apple already debunked this theory, but the results from the speed test and more support Apple's claims. So the case manufacturer was able to reach 200 megabits per second no matter the charging speed, because as you see, as the phone hits up a little, as maybe you don't put it exactly on the right spot, right? If you don't like use a perfectly aligned case, then you might get slightly different speeds. So they actually accounted for some of the real world variants that you might have. Thank you to Krikov of Production, saying I have become a very competent blogger. I consider myself a live streamer. Bloggers are a little bit more like early 2000s, but I very much appreciate the compliment. So, and throughout the board, we got 200 megabits per second. What's interesting here is I'm not actually sure what that means for the peak download speeds of the C1, right? Because now I've seen people speculate that the antenna or that the C1 is only capable of handling 200 megabits per second. I'm not sure that's the takeaway we should be actually deriving from this. Maybe they just didn't get faster 5G connectivity wherever they were, but regardless, they showed that there is no impact even when you put on like the MagSafe puck. So this is testing without case, with a case, and with a case, and even charging with a puck. So yeah, definitely pretty good results. No variance here. Maybe they even limited the max download speed just so they could get a certain sustained speed, because that's also something that I see with my 5G. Like it's easy for me to hit 250 consistently, but when I want to hit 300, 350, even in an area that I know is capable of it, it can be completely different from variant to variant, like from cycle to cycle. So I assume they might have done something to isolate for that. Because let's say this modem is capable of 400, but whatever carrier they were testing it out with cannot provide that. So maybe they played around with that a little. But regardless, it does show that MagSafe by itself, which I mean you can kind of add to this device, just not officially, unfortunately. You add it with a case, which that's why I complained that Apple does not build a case like that. In fact, the silicon case that they're selling for the iPhone 16e does not support MagSafe or in any magnets for wireless charging. And I wish they at least make a clear case that supports Qi 2 charging, right? It might not reach MagSafe speeds, but at least it reaches like the magnet form factor, makes it easier to align with certain accessories. I mean, when you look at, for example, the car market, there are plenty of phone mounts that you put your MagSafe phone on, and they just connect. You don't need to like connect them in this complicated way. Just magnets, just works. So, and apparently, whatever those magnets do, they don't interfere with the C1, which to me makes perfect sense, given even the most basic understanding of technology. But some people were worried, but Apple actually came out and fought against those worries. So that's actually quite crazy. And now you know that the reason why MagSafe was cut is not because Apple sucks at modem development, but because Apple just sucks in general and wants very high profit margins. Yeah, but of course, if you do not care that MagSafe is removed, the 16e is now available for pre-order. You can start getting it the next week officially. It will be delivered, or you can pick it up in stores next Friday. I still encourage people to wait out on official reviews. I do want to see the real-world battery life. I want to see the real-world display brightness. And I want to see the real-world camera performance. Now, yes, of course, I want to see the real-world 5G speeds and connectivity strength, but that's almost completely disconnected from the 16e to me. I just want a deep dive analysis into the C1. I hope Apple partners with some mega nerd outlets and they just give them a lot more details about the C1. A little bit like how in the early days they were a little bit more open about talking about some of the details about Apple Silicon. Speaking of the 16e itself, now really, I believe you asked about the battery capacity. We should be probably getting that very soon, but what we do already have about the 16e are benchmarks result for the A18 chip. So it gets up to 24,000 points in Geekbench's graphics test, so that's about 13% slower. Now, some people might say, well, why is it only 13% slower? It does lose 20% of your cores, and that's because speed is also very dependent on the bandwidth. And given the fact that I expect this one to have the exact same 8 gigabytes of RAM of LPDDR5X 7500, so as long as they don't slow down the memory, the loss of graphics performance will not happen linearly to the loss of GPU cores. Now, is there a chance that the memory might be slowed down to something like LPDDR5 6400? I don't expect it, because Apple has actually talked about when they launched the 18 and 18 Pro that the higher bandwidth does help with Apple Intelligence, and they are very much advertising this as an Apple Intelligence optimized device. Now, of course, we do know that Apple Intelligence does run on slower bandwidth because the A17 Pro only has 6400 megatransfers per second memory, and that obviously supports Apple Intelligence just fine. But I'm just trying to say one GPU core that is being lost, going from 5 GPU cores to 4, that it's not as big of a deal as some people made it out to be, and you still get compatibility with all the AAA games that have been being introduced for the A17 Pro, the A18, the 18 Pro, the M1 chip, and up. And the other kind of benchmark thing, but it's really not, is the charging speed. So regulatory filing in China suggests that the iPhone 16e will support USB-C fast charging at up to 29 watts. which would put in line with iPhone 16. Now, I always encourage you that the spec point for this does not have to line up with real world testing. In fact, Apple on their website still recommends to use a 20-watt charger, or at least that's how they measure how you get to like 50% in 30 minutes or something like that. So they themselves don't really encourage people to get 30-watt chargers, which is funny because obviously they sell this expensive, nice dual port 35-watt charger. But yeah, if you were worried that this might be a dramatically slower charging device than before because of the way slow wireless charging, well, don't worry. And of course, if you are coming from something like an iPhone SE 3, you are getting capabilities that the iPhone SE 3 did not even dream of, right? With the larger screen, brighter screen, OLED screen, higher density screen, the notch, 48 megapixel camera. So yes, I know if you're really trying to compare it to the iPhone 16, there are things that might sound disappointing, especially to people who are very deep into the Apple ecosystem. You care about things like MagSafe, you care about things like ultra wideband stuff for your AirTags. That's all cool, but Apple needed to save $200 somehow, right? So while I'm not excusing some of those choices, I do expect usually a company to accept a lower, what even be a slower margin, but I do expect Apple to accept a lower margin on a device like the 16E. But then you consider stuff like tariffs, you consider stuff about the uncertainty whether or not they will have to keep paying Qualcomm royalties. Maybe they will have some patent infringements found on the C1 at that point. I don't think that Qualcomm will ask for the C1 to be banned. I'll just think they'll just rub their hands and be like, you know what, it's pay time, Apple. But when it comes to all the other stuff, I think it's actually a quite decent product. Maybe wait until it's like 10-15% discounted, and as I said, wait for reviews, because if the camera is actually significantly worse, that might be a deal breaker and a reason to get the 16, or wait for even bigger price discounts once the 17 is out. But it's not a bad product. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. But again, this does not end here, because we already have more news and rumors about Apple's modems. So this actually comes from a leaker with a proven track record, which I do not know which leaker this is. Which one is that? A private account on X with a history of sharing accurate information. Well, that's nice. You didn't even link it? That's certainly curious. But I'll just trust Mac rumors on that one. But supposedly, yes, and this would have shocked me. Apple is already working on C2. In fact, I'll even leak something else. Guys, this is exclusive information coming from MarkTech. Leave me a super chat for thank you for this information. The iPhone 18, 19, 20, one of those will actually get the C3 modem that Apple is already working on. Right? That blew your mind, right? Absolutely. No, but seriously, the way that chips are developed, usually, like, you start actually developing a chip that is going to come out like 5 years later, and you get onto serious development for it like 3 years before it hits actual products, right? So like the M4 chip, for example, as we got it last year in 2024, that one probably started actually just after the M1 came out, late 2020 and then into 2021. That's just how it works. And Apple probably had some broad design understanding for the M4 even before the official launch of Apple Silicon. That's just how it happens. When you look, for example, at AMD and the way they develop their Ryzen Zen chips, you'll find that they actually have teams that work kind of like I don't want to say opposite of each other, but like one team develops Zen 2, then the other develops Zen 3, but obviously along the way they take whatever information they can get from the Zen 2 team, and then the Zen 2 team, once the other team starts working on Zen 3, actually also starts working on Zen 4. And they, along the way, they pick up whatever the other team is currently developing for Zen 3. And that's how you start, like 2, 3, 4, even 4 years before a chip comes out. And this is why I promise you, not only is Apple already working on a C2 modem, they're also already working on the successor for that. So according to this leaker with a proven track record, saying that the C2 modem has a C4020 identifier within Apple, seems to confirm that it already exists. Yes, it definitely is. That does not mean it's in the final stages of development, but we might actually get a surprisingly quick turnover from the C1 to the C2. Now, we already know the C1 is built, for example, on TSMC's 4 nanometer, and the transceiver is built on 7 nanometer. So there is room. And again, I do acknowledge that it's probably very difficult to scale down the transceiver, but even maybe a little, you can turn it from 7 nanometer to maybe some variant of 6 nanometer, or even like a 4 nanometer node, who knows. But then the 4 nanometer base modem can actually become easily a 3 nanometer chip. And given that Apple has absolute mass orders for TSMC's 3 nanometer, I don't think there's anything standing in the way of Apple just saying, you know what, the C1 is our early shit, we can get it from Arizona, we can make some people happy in politics through that, but let's quickly switch to 3 nanometer for our modems, quickly at that point, and also switch to 2 nanometer for our processors, and we'll actually have a very nice like lineup. We can order like 4 nanometer transceivers, 3 nanometer modems, and 2 nanometer chips. TSMC will be super happy with us. We can get really big discounts. We can order regular chips. We can order cellular modems. We can at some point, that's also another rumor we're going to cover, we can also order Wi-Fi modems. So Apple actually has the largest leverage they ever had over a partner like TSMC, because now they also have such a variety of chips that Apple could conceivably actually go to Intel and say, you know what, Intel, you might have screwed up in the past with your nodes, with your actual processors, and with your modems, but we really like what you're doing with Intel 18A. How about we put our next Wi-Fi chip on your newest node? Or you know what, Intel 3 is kind of a 5 nanometer modem or 5 nanometer node, right? But it's dirt cheap. How about you make us some future modems on that, right? So there's plenty of room for Apple to now actually not just leverage mass orders with TSMC, but also leverage the power of TSMC's competitors to get better deals. The leakers requested that we not link to their private account in our coverage of their post. So in this case, I actually have to trust TSMC Mac rumors on that one. Yeah, I guess the identifier is kind of the thing. So, but I mean, they probably don't want Apple to ask Elon to say like, can you please find that account that is leaking like confidential information, like internal identifiers? So this probably is better if it's happening through actual journalists as an interim. What's also interesting is that people like Mark Gurman have actually already spoken about successors to what we now know as the C1, and that they would eventually introduce either on a second generation or in some kind of Pro variant or in a third generation, but sometime in like the first 3 years, that Apple would also have chips that are good enough for iPhone Pros, iPad Pros, maybe even Macs, and that those modems will also offer support for millimeter wave. Now, this article does not go into that, whether or not this delivers it, but we do expect the regular generational uplifts, faster, more reliable connectivity, even more power efficiency. being capable of also running in much larger products and things like that. So definitely nothing crazy thus far. But yeah, if you were wondering if C1 is end of the line, I don't think so. And in fact, I do believe that C1 will come out much faster than people expect. Like, I've seen people speculate it might take like until like the iPhone 18 generation. I could really see like the next iPad Pro, like especially if it's only really coming in the first half of 2026. I could really see that introducing a C2 in exactly a year from now or something like that. Maybe like 14 months. So that's the iPhone. That's this. That's a completely different type of rumor that I definitely didn't expect to be covering. Now, this again goes back to what we've already reacted to in the video. So there's also a Reuters article. So Johnny Sarugi is definitely doing the rounds right now, informing people about the newest success for Apple Silicon, which does lead me to suggest that Apple has a lot of internal confidence in it. I think if this was a very subdued launch where they really talked about, you know what, it's our first chip, it's just for the SE, but they seem to be very confident in saying this is just the start. They're committing to future updates, bringing it to more devices. According to Johnny Sarucci, we're going to Apple is going to keep improving that technology each generation. So that really goes back to your question. If we're going to get a new chip every year, that's not exactly what each generation means. That's why I've seen people say, oh, Apple is committed to updating it every year. I don't think he means each iPhone generation. I think he just means every new chip will be better, which obviously is not a big shock. That it becomes a platform for us that will be used to truly differentiate this technology for our products. So a similar pitch to what they had with the original launch of Apple Silicon in 2020. Apple supply chain analyst Min-Chi Kuo today said the iPhone 17 Air will also be equipped with the C1 modem, so that does line up with previous rumors we've been covering. And of course, that does have a business impact. So Qualcomm expect like Apple's reliance on their modems to drop from basically 100% to 20%. They are repeating the same stats that we've already heard. The modem is between it's on 4 nanometer for the actual modem, 7 nanometer for the transceiver. They tested it very rigorously. There is a full Reuters article about that. It's actually, as far as I can see, not behind a paywall, and it goes into some of the exact same points, maybe with a little bit more detail. So if you want to read that for yourself, you can do it, but I do believe we've actually covered most of it. And thankfully to that video that we watched in the beginning. Now, to what Min-Chi Kuo said, because I'm the absolute master of transitions, is actually that a new Apple chip is coming, and that's kind of the biggest news in my opinion, but one that isn't shocking to anyone who has followed Apple rumors over the last year or so. And in fact, that Apple, now that we are expecting a C2, that to me is no surprise at all. But according to Min-Chi Kuo, we're going to see another Apple new chip inside the iPhone 17 lineup. So if there was some uncertainty before whether or not, well, at least according to Kuo, Apple would have a Wi-Fi chip ready at a similar time frame as they have now 5G ready, well, seemingly according to Min-Chi Kuo, we are going to get Apple's Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modem inside the entire iPhone 17 lineup. So, following Qualcomm, Broadcom's Wi-Fi chips, because yes, Apple does use Qualcomm for 5G and Broadcom for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So according to Kuo, Broadcom's Wi-Fi chips will also be replaced by Apple's in-house chips at a faster pace. My latest industry survey indicates that all new iPhones that launch in the second half of 2025, so that's all iPhone 17 models, that includes the base iPhone 17, the iPhone 17 Air, and of course the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max, will feature Apple's in-house modems, versus the slim iPhone 17 will adopt Apple's C1 modem chip. So whether it's Apple not yet believing in the capabilities of the C1 to fully replace Qualcomm's modems in devices like the regular iPhone 17 and the 17 Pro or the Pro Max, or if the C1 is so energy efficient that Apple deems it to be better than like Qualcomm's X85 modem, and that's why they're prioritizing its use in the iPhone 17 Air. I don't know, but maybe it's both. And according to Min-Chi Kuo, he's saying beyond cost reduction, the switch to in-house Wi-Fi chips will enhance connectivity across Apple devices. So while that sounds actually really, really positive the way it's worded, does not mean that they will necessarily offer way better connectivity than what Qualcomm speeds offer. But then again, top peak download speeds, peak upload speeds, they're not everything in a device. The fact that Apple is doing this kind of on-screen awareness, this contextual like speed modulation for the C1 by integrating it with the A18, that is of course integrated with iOS, with iPadOS, they might just improve the feeling of connectivity. And that's similar to how Apple Silicon was great. Not only was it very efficient by itself, by using a newer node or a better node, right, which this one does over the Samsung built Qualcomm modem, but also its integration with the system was key. And its focus on certain things that Apple knew Apple users prioritized, like very fast single core performance over rather than having a ton of cores, though at this point they also have a version with a ton of cores. Very fast integrated GPU rather than having a dedicated GPU with like its own memory pool that needs its own cooling, right? And more unique stuff, even back in the day when nobody else was doing AI accelerators and laptop chips, Apple did have the Apple Neural Engine right away in the M1. Of course, before that, they already had it in like the A12X and the they did not have it in the A10X. Yep, it was introduced with, the Apple Neural Engine was introduced with the A11, then greatly improved with the A12. So the A12X chips, the A12X chips had it, but not the A10X chip. My brain power is unlimited right now. Previously, we had heard that the new Wi-Fi chip could arrive in at least some iPhone 17 models, but it was unclear which ones. Now it seems that Apple plans to replace Broadcom's Wi-Fi chips in its entire fall iPhone lineup, including 17, 17 Air, 17 Pro, and 17 Pro Max. By the way, guys, I just read Krukov of Production. Guys, how can you mistype my name? Like, in the chat, like it's literally in the name of the channel. It's not like my channel is called Apple Tech Analysis by a guy with curly hair. It's called Mark Tech, and it's written with a C. And no, I'm not drunk to be doing this. I'm just really, I've seen like 4 people mistype my name, and I'm like, guys, do you dictate to your phone and don't check what it writes? Because I've seen like my name spelled multiple times and it's right in the channel name and it's starting to hurt my feelings. So, C1 chip brought battery life improvements, well, at least according to Apple, and some people are saying that basically the internal expectation for Apple is like a 25% improvement in efficiency, which if they are architecturally really similar to like the X65 and X70 modems, but now they're using TSMC 4nm rather than Samsung 4nm. That to me makes absolute sense and how they can achieve like way better efficiency. By the way, guys, we have a little bit more of you watching than I expected today, especially at the weird time that I'm streaming at today. So leave a like, share the video with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. You guys know I love interacting with your lively comment section. And you can leave a small donation in the form of a super chat, super sticker, become a channel member right here on YouTube, or support you over on Patreon. However you choose to support us here, or me. It's just me. Even my cat is looking away from me. That's all very much appreciated. But yeah, that's actually an interesting rumor, because if we actually go to Apple's website, you'll find an interesting thing. Now, it has nothing to do with the C1, and I've been trying to explain that to people on Twitter, that the Wi-Fi capabilities of the iPhone 16e have absolutely no relationship to the use of the C1 chip. But if we look at the 16e and we look at its tech specs, can I actually do a comparison from here? It doesn't matter, I know the tech specs. So when you look at its Wi-Fi capabilities, oh, they actually do have a breakdown of the bands they're supporting. That's interesting. But one thing that you'll look at is Wi-Fi 6 with 2x2 MIMO. Right, MIMO stands for multiple in, multiple out. That allows you to basically improve your signal strength and therefore give you better speeds. And now when we look at something like, let's say, the iPhone 16, the regular iPhone 16, you'll find it has a slightly better spec point when it comes to that. It offers Wi-Fi 7. Now, it's still 2x2 MIMO. I know that technically you can go 4x4 for like Wi-Fi 7, but it's probably gonna be overkill. You'll need like larger antennas. You might actually end up consuming more energy for that. But Wi-Fi 7 obviously is better than Wi-Fi 6. Because it does build on the Wi-Fi 6E standard. 6E introduced 6 gigahertz connectivity, and the key to Wi-Fi 7 is that you can combine your 2.4, your 5 gigahertz, and your 6 gigahertz networks into one. So it's important because Apple's Wi-Fi 7 modems are not actually like the ones that are right now in the iPhone. They're not, in the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro, they're not actually faster than the Wi-Fi 6E modems that they had, for example, on the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. They offer the same 2.4 gigabits per second top download speeds, but it does match with the better capabilities of Wi-Fi 7. So while yes, Wi-Fi 6 definitely looks bad because Wi-Fi 6 is not just one generation old, it's 2 generations old. There's 6E and then 7 to move up to. I do expect the Wi-Fi 6 in the new 16E to be half the speed of this Wi-Fi 7 modem. So when it comes to what Apple is going to do with their own Wi-Fi modems, there's actually been a rumor that, and I believe the code name for this chip was Proxima, was that Apple would only offer Wi-Fi 6E initially when introducing their own Wi-Fi modems. So kind of how C1 lacks connectivity to something like millimeter wave or the fastest download speeds that like Qualcomm's X85 modem will offer or something like that. We expected Apple's initial Wi-Fi modem to actually have a lower spec. Maybe it so happened, because I do not believe that Apple will replace a Wi-Fi 7 modem on the iPhone 16 with a Wi-Fi 6E modem on the iPhone 17. What I do expect instead is that Apple might offer the same Wi-Fi 7 speeds as they have right now, around 2.4 gigabits per second. They will match the Wi-Fi 7 specification, but they will just not go beyond, right? Like Qualcomm offers like 2 times or even more the download speeds on their modems. Broadcom technically also sells way better Wi-Fi 7 modems than this. But given that most people don't have home internet even remotely fast enough to leverage that, so as long as you meet the specification, which will improve things like peer-to-peer connectivity for stuff like AirDrop and even personal hotspots, that's probably enough for Apple, right? So while I do expect that Apple will pull off Wi-Fi 7 in their own modems, I do expect it to be kind of like Wi-Fi 7 minus Wi-Fi 7 minimum, where it's just not gonna compete in terms of top speeds with the rest, but it's gonna be more efficient and cheaper for Apple to integrate, which could be key to like not increasing the price, for example, of the iPhone 17 generation. But again, it's hard to say. Some people have speculated that the higher than expected price for the 16E might mean something bad for the 17 generation, and that we'll actually get a $100 price increase on the 17 models. specifically because the 17, for example, versus the 16 gets a crucial technology like ProMotion. But I couldn't tell you, right? All of this is speculation. And yes, if you look at it here, for example, versus the 16E, the regular 16 does offer ultra wideband, does offer thread networking technology. So if you are interested in those tech specs, don't get the 16E. Yeah, but that's about it for all the cellular stuff and the Wi-Fi stuff and the modem stuff, because we do have, I believe, only one thing that is kind of two things to talk about. First is one thing that actually got cleared up relatively quickly, in my opinion. This came from John Prosser, who of course recently leaked the supposed design of the 17 Pro and later on the 17 Air. That's of course his render, his mock-up of what the design will look like. And he did said in a podcast that he expects the 17 Air to have a 6.7-inch screen. Now, this is interesting because according to Ross Young, the 17 Air would actually have a slightly weird display size that Apple has never used before. When you actually go back to a 6.5-inch iPhones, that includes the XS Max and the 11 Pro Max, those actually had like 6.46-inch screens, right? When you go up to 6.7-inch iPhones, they're basically 6.7 inches. They're like 6.69 or something like that. So if Apple were to offer a 6.6-inch display, which in this case would be a 6.55-inch screen, right? This would be a unique size. And that, to me, sounded weird. Not because it's impossible. If you look, for example, at the iPad, you see that Apple loves their weird 0.1-inch display differences, like 10.9-inch on the iPad Air and then 11 inches on the iPad Pro, right? Just to make the bezels a little bit thinner on the Pros than they are on the Air, but overall just use the same, like, overall form factor. But seemingly they will still do that, right? So I was kind of really happy by what John Prosser said, because I believed Apple might actually use the larger body of a 6.7-inch form factor. Again, it's a very small difference to 6.6 inches, but it's still a little bit larger, that Apple could use that to put in a slightly larger battery to hopefully not do that stupid compromise that we've heard of, that Apple might cut stereo speakers from the 17 Air. Please, Apple. Like, I can even understand cutting MagSafe, because God knows, while I use it, I know most people actually don't. But cutting off stereo speakers would just be the most insane thing. Like, there are three things that I always bring up that are very intangible, but still, to me, very big selling points of Apple's devices. There are speakers, there are haptics, and there are microphones, right? Well, they might not always be the absolute best, even though more often than not they actually are, at least in a similar form factor. Obviously, if you make a device twice the size, you can put in nicer speakers, for example. But I just really hope that the 17 Air doesn't end up as compromised as some people speculate it might be. Now, if Apple uses silicon carbide batteries inside the 17 Air, then I'm actually not worried. John Prosser said previously that it might be 5.64 millimeters thick exactly. Whether or not that ends up being true and what technologies they end up using it, I don't know. But I really hope that they don't go as far as to cut features, or at least, I mean, technically it would still have speakers, but experience points that to me are just absolutely crucial. Because when you look, for example, at the 16 and 16 Plus, Apple doesn't just advertise that they have like stereo speakers. Apple even says that they support like spatial audio playback. Believe me, that does not work with a mono speaker setup. So yeah, some definitely confusion about that spec point. Since then, Ross Young has actually gone back to Twitter and said that no, it is still expected to have a 6.55-inch screen, but that he said in 2027 it might move up to a 6.7-inch screen. So Apple might be playing around with some features that they could be introducing down the road. Maybe the 17 Air does not have the extremely thin bezels of the current Pros, but maybe the 19 Air will, and at that point they'll be able to move from 6.6 inches, which is 6.55, to 6.7 inches, which is probably would be like the standard that they've already used, which is like almost perfect 6.7 inches. So yeah, again, there is some speculation here going back and forth. So usually I trust John Prosser, but I usually trust Ross Young way more. So I'm leaning a little bit more on the Ross Young report. When it comes to the thickness, Minchikwo previously said it's somewhere between 5 and 6 millimeters, maybe 5.5. John Prosser saying it's 5.64. Very small adjustment to the chassis can still happen. I definitely don't expect this device to suddenly be 4 millimeters thick, nor do I expect it to suddenly be 7 millimeters thick, but Apple could go as thick as 6 millimeters, or as thick or as thin as like 5.4. Like there is still like some wiggle room in the design, obviously. Yeah, but then there is also another display size rumor, and this one comes from a leaker that we have covered in the past, Digital Test Station, a Weibo-based leaker in China. So this one is actually very interesting because this is talking about a book-style foldable from Apple, which, if you have again followed Apple leaks and rumors over the last year, you know that the rumors switched from Apple's first foldable being a little bit of a flip-like device, right, to more of a Samsung Fold-like device. Now, there's no expectation of like a crazy trifold or anything like that. Apple is probably not, well, they might, looking at what we're seeing from the iPhone Air. But for example, the Oppo Find N5 just came out. Right, and that one is just crazy, crazy thin. And despite having even a very large battery, there is still one thing that I really wanted to cover about this device, and that is its display. Because we've had like, I think that MKBHD is honestly just getting lazy when it comes to reading out spec points, and his mind just leads him to believe that a spec point is as good as the actual experience. And what I mean by that is that all of these devices advertise like very high brightness recently, right? So this one, for example, promises, I believe, 1600 nits in day-to-day brightness, 1400 nits, and then 2100 nits in peak. Now, looking at it here, while it's not too far off from 1400, it is definitely off. Now, yes, you can measure those things a little differently, and I'm sure there are ways in which you can achieve 1400 nits on here, but like the Pixel does advertise like 2400 or something like that, and it's like 200 nits off, but it's 200 nits off at over 2000. This one is over 200 nits off at a little bit over 1000. So I'm just trying to say, whenever you hear like a tech reviewer like talk about one spec point or something like that, please actually go to like more nerdy websites and check if those spec points are actually met. Like, for example, when you look even at the battery life is actually quite decent. But when you look at performance, even Marquez said that his device overheated, and not like in gaming or anything like it. So making this device this razor thin definitely has its impact. For one, you can already see it does not meet the multi-core performance of other Snapdragon 8 Elite devices. It comes a little bit below the single core results, definitely below like the peak single core results. It definitely doesn't reach the highest Antutu scores or 3D Mark results, so it's definitely downclocked, but it still manages to actually have like the problem is it is already downclocked, and then it loses a percentage that is somewhat similar to the rest. But that also means if it ever gets confronted with a task where it really would have wanted more performance, it will throttle potentially even faster than any other Snapdragon 8 Elite device. So while it doesn't have terrible Well, there are two differences here. When it comes to the GPU, it's not simply about being underclocked. It is also using a 7-core Snapdragon 8 Elite rather than the 8-core version. So you are really working with, like, it's not quite the same 8 Elite. It will not give you the same multi-core performance. It will... I'm actually not sure. Does it have the same amount of GPU cores? Because so the CPU is binned, which does explain the multi-core, but its GPU power is also gimped. Is that because it's underclocked, or is it also limited in terms of? No, I think it has the exact amount of GPU cores, so it's probably just underclocked. Something in the ballpark of 45% loss, which is a lot, but par for the course for a device with flagship silicon. Okay. We had some trouble properly stressing the CPU on the Find N5. Okay, so this device probably is a little bit too early to get like really valid results, but this is why I really encourage you to look into stuff like this. This is stuff that unfortunately Marques might mention in a video, but he will just not see it worth us actually, like, you know, testing out the game, running some frame rate tests. That's just like, unfortunately, both Marques and Aaron, Mr. Who's the Boss, they just moved away from any kind of detailed testing, and they just rely on spec sheets, like base level benchmarks, always like Geekbench and Wildlife Extreme, which at some point I'm just gonna start pulling my hair out whenever I still see big YouTubers testing out a completely outdated test that has been replaced. If you even want to give an advantage to Android, it's an unrealistic advantage, but use Solar Bay, right? Solar Bay is a ray tracing test, and it's seemingly way better optimized for some reason for Qualcomm than it is for Apple, because actual games do not show that big of a ray tracing disparity. I believe Apple is like somewhere 8,000 or something like that, so more in the ballpark of the 8 Gen 3. Can I actually expand this to see Apple? No? So let me look actually at the 16 Pro Max. So do they have Solar Bay here? They do. Yeah, so it's below the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, supposedly. And I can promise you, this does not reflect actual real-world ray tracing performance of the A18 Pro processor. So again, a lot of 3D Marks tests just really like bandwidth. You can really see you can kind of almost align it with this result, because the iPhone uses 7500 megatransfers memory, and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 devices overwhelmingly used 8533. So these numbers almost line up. So that should give you a good understanding of what you're actually testing here. Benvin is saying, when will the first impression videos drop? Probably midpoint next week, like Tuesday or Wednesday. Well, actually, very first impressions might be something like unboxings. So that might actually be Monday, but that would leave us with Wednesday or Thursday with reviews. So it depends how early Apple might have gotten it out to reviewers, but somewhere around that. But definitely all before Friday, when it actually hits consumers. And Thursday would really be somewhat last minute. Maybe Apple would want to go last minute because they might just want to have as much time to optimize the C1, maybe with like some day one software updates. But yeah, that's about what I would expect. So, but let's actually go back to the initial rumor that I wanted to cover, because yes, we have now stated that Apple's first foldable, unless the first foldable is actually an iPad Mac hybrid, but that's a very different story. Let's say Apple's first iPhone foldable is a book-style device, so it's not a flip, it's more like a fold. But even more interestingly, and so according to Digital Tech Station here, it's actually a lot similar to these passport-like foldables than to whatever Samsung is doing with the Galaxy Fold. I could be very wrong, but I view it like a Pixel A lineup, not as E as many are saying. You mean the 16E? Well, the 16E is objectively, like, one thing that I don't understand is when you look, for example, from the iPhone 16 Pro down to the 16, right? Get $200 less expensive. You lose ProMotion. You get a slightly smaller screen. You get thicker bezels. You get one GPU core less. You get no variable refresh rate, but that's part of ProMotion. You lose both high refresh rate and variable refresh rate. You have a worse main camera, going from a 1 by 1.28 inch main sensor to a 1 by 1.56 inch sensor. You lose the telephoto camera, the 5x telephoto. You actually get a technically worse ultra wide, from a 48 megapixel one to down to a 12 megapixel one. So you basically have all those same downgrades. You have one camera less on the 16E versus the 16. You have one GPU core less. You have the same size screen, but you have the you have the notch rather than the dynamic island, and you have a lower brightness, but the same refresh rate. So what you else lose is stuff like MagSafe, ultra wideband, Wi-Fi 7, all features that if you really care about them, you probably are fine paying $800. But the fact that you even keep the same base storage configuration, don't forget, you now pay $600 for a product that has the exact same base storage configuration as the iPhone 16 Pro, right? Because that is $1,000 with 128 gigabytes. So while I'm not saying that Apple shouldn't improve certain things, in fact, I do believe that the Pros should start with 256 gigabytes. I do believe that the regular models should have ProMotion, and I do believe that the 16E should have features like MagSafe. To me, being surprised by the cuts in the 16E, like, maybe you can be surprised by the individual cuts, but being surprised that device is overall worse than the 16, of course it is. And expecting it to be like $500 in the current market, again, tariffs, things like that, I would have kind of expected it to be more like $550, but I guess it will probably very soon be $550, given the way that Apple works with carriers to offer discounts relatively early. Yeah, I'm not saying it's the greatest price product ever, but people who are predicting that it will flop, to me, just insane. This should have cost £500 at max. Yeah, there's obviously currency issues, and the pound is not what it used to be, my friend, unfortunately, because if you actually think about it, at MSRP, without value added tax, because don't forget, the dollar prices do not include value added tax, £500 used to be $600. Right now, what do you get? 500. How do I write pounds with the sign? To USD. It's $630, right? Wait, it's actually more than I thought it would be. But that's with MSRP, right? The UK does MSRP included, because otherwise that will be a much. That's actually something that I've seen being bad about the Canadian prices. That Canada, it costs 900 Canadian dollars, and 900 Canadian dollars actually also comes out to exactly 630 USD. But Canadian prices, because of big regional variances, do not include the value added tax like the euro prices do. So if this is with value added tax, it's good. If it's not, it's bad. So that's actually interesting to me. Benveni, can you let me know what the UK situation is when it comes to the inclusion of VAT for MSRP? That's actually interesting. Does UK include VAT in pricing? What the actual? Does UK include VAT in MSRP? VAT is normally included in the price you see in shops, but there are some exceptions. Okay, so that tells me something, but not everything. In MSRP, Apple. Orders placed in the UK will be subject to a VAT rate of 20%. Not intra-community. What does that mean? They are inclusive of VAT. Wait, that's actually then pretty good though. That's actually pretty good if that includes a 20% VAT. Some say it's 25%. That would be very, very high. Jesus. Yeah, but that's interesting. I'm not sure. I know that here in Germany, VAT is included and it's 19%. So, and the math actually works out mostly once you include that. My cat is getting a little bit anxious that I'm still talking, but I do still have one rumor to finish up, and that is, again, Apple's foldable. And according to Digital Test Station, the Apple Foldable will have a 5.5-inch outer screen, to be exact, 5.49 inches, and then an inner screen of 7.74 inches, kind of similar to like an iPad mini. Apparently, both displays have an unprecedented aspect ratio, which is interesting. That would suggest that the internal screen is not basically a square, like the Oppo Find N, for example, has a 10:9 aspect ratio, so it's basically 1:1. That would be interesting. I wonder if Apple uses a much wider outer screen, which I believe this actually does state. It's shorter and wider than the Oppo Find N's outer screen. Right, so and if the outer screen is wider, then once you unfold it, that should give you a much wider aspect ratio, maybe something like 3:2, or at least 4:3, more like an iPad, once unfolded, which would make it a lot closer to an iPad mini than it does with like the current foldables. Like for example, Marquez just obviously showed off the Oppo Find N, A5, and he showed like this disparity with the iPad mini because of the different aspect ratios. Where is it? There. So now he did make one mistake. Obviously, this is not an exactly squared off screen. If you put it on the side, that will actually still give you a wider video, but the iPad mini will give you a way more to look at, right, in a video like that. So this might be something that Apple might want to rectify, where like in comparison to these kinds of products, where Apple might actually want to have an aspect ratio closer to this once unfolded than to this, and having a wider but shorter outer screen, which if you look at the iPad mini is basically half, would go a long way to do it. Obviously, the outer screens are super duper wide, basically being like 21:9 aspect ratio screens rather than the 19.5:9 that we see from most regular screens on smartphones. So that would be a step forward if you really think that this is way too compromised for you. So that's actually interesting because this does line up with like a very influential like launch in the foldable segment. The Oppo Find N5 is supposed to be like kind of like the thinnest, most flagshipy foldable we get. It's also a little bit unfortunate that we are not getting a new OnePlus Open. I quite like that device, and I quite like their take on the software for foldables. Yeah, it's actually really interesting that we are getting this info about the iPhone Fold, or whatever you're going to call it, the iPad mini Fold, however Apple's going to brand it, the iPhone Ultra, right? Apple can use the Ultra branding somewhere for the iPhone. So that will definitely be interesting once it actually comes out. And I'm sure that we'll see Min-Chi Kuo, Mark Gurman, and especially Ross Young in the not too distant future comment on whether or not this is true or not, maybe the exact resolution, something like that, maybe the exact screen technology, like whether Apple is using like Samsung M14 or something way newer because that product is still years off or something like that, whether there will be something like an under display camera, or will still rely on notches and dynamic islands. So a lot of stuff that we still don't know, including the fact whether or not this product ultimately even comes out, because don't forget, everything can be canceled last minute. Apple worked for years on something like the Apple Car. Apple glasses eventually became more Apple Vision Pro because the technology for like glasses just wasn't there yet. So yeah, keep everything in the back of your mind, but don't get necessarily too excited. That would be my recommendation for now. But yeah, but that's about it, because we have covered actually a lot in this video. Thank you to everyone who joined. I hope you can take away something from it. And if you don't, then please at least still do all the YouTube jazz. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share that with anybody who think might enjoy it. And please, to everyone, comment also afterwards, not just during the stream, but also after. That helps tremendously with the algorithm. Again, the last videos had some notable issues in the algorithm. I tried to be more careful with my words today. And beyond all that, whenever you catch me live, consider leaving a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker. Consider becoming a channel member or a supporter over on Patreon. Thank you guys for all your support. I'll see you next time. And as always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. This is Mark Tech, tuning out and promising to do a lot more Apple C chip coverage in the future. Don't worry, this is not the end.